Max effort work. Screwed something up. Oh, that's why I can't spell. So we got dynamic effort, or DE, as you're going to see in text and shorthand. So if max effort work is moving the most amount of weight for the fewest amount of reps, what do you think dynamic effort is? Using context clues here. There's a specific aspect of this that I'm looking for. It's in consideration to the rate at which we want this moved. What are we thinking here?
Is it like a lot of fast, quicker movements?
Yeah, exactly. So dynamic effort, you are trying to move a specific percentage as fast as possible in a short amount of time. All right? Dynamic effort, essentially, you're trying to move a specific percentage as fast as possible in a short amount of time. Now, where it gets kind of dicey is how people figure out what is what. The big thing that we need to understand here, so we're talking about this percentage. I'm just going to throw out a generalized percentage bracket. Usually, from what I have seen, most percentage work on the dynamic effort day is done between 45 and 65% of your max. That's not going to seem like a lot because it's not. It's not a lot of actual work, okay? Or it's not a hard percentage. What makes the dynamic effort work is when Louis Simmons took the dynamic effort work, and again, I'm spelling this word, don't know if it's right, don't shoot me. He added accommodating resistance to the barbell. So what we were finding out with these low percentages is once you got past your sticking point or the part of the lift that was hard for you, you kind of coasted through the rest of the lift. Well, what Louis did was he started adding chains. First he added chains. He would take chains and he would attach them to the ends of the barbell. So if you're doing a deadlift with 200 pounds and you have 100 pounds of chain, 50 on each side, 100 pounds of chain total, at the start of that deadlift, you had 200 pounds on that bar. But then by the time you lifted all the way up and all the chains were off the ground, you then had an extra 100 pounds. So at the top of that lift, the weight is how much then? You started with 2 and you added 100. At the top, it's how much? 300. So you have 300 pounds at the top of the bar. What it was making the athletes do was work harder as they got through the top end of the range of the motion. It also helps you create a stronger lockout. So Louis started adding chains to this. But then he got a hold of jump stretch bands. And those are, remember, if you go in our weight room, we have both chains and bands. If you go into the closet around the corner, there's a bunch of chains hanging around. We didn't get to use them as much last year. Hopefully we get to use them this year when we get back in the weight room. But we have chains and the bands. I like bands more because it creates more work in a short amount of time. But then what Louis started doing was he started adding bands. Bands do the same thing as chains, but it works at a faster rate. So, and the other thing too is you can create more variability with bands. You can double a band up, you can single a band up, you can put multiple bands on, you can have a really thin band, you can have a really thick band. So remember, we talked about the biggest thing with the conjugate method is the variability. Bands provide a little more variability than chains in terms of how they work. So you use a little thin band, you put 2 of those on either end, and then you go ahead and lift the bar. You're adding anywhere from 50 to 75 pounds at the top. If you use a big thick band, by the time you get to the top of the lift, you may be adding anywhere from like 2 to 250 pounds of tension. Just depends on the band and what kind of lift you're doing. So the whole purpose is we're not necessarily here. If I'm doing bench press, from here as I'm starting to press, it's going to start getting gradually harder until I get to here. So I am, instead of doing, at the bottom here, if I'm doing a 150-pound bench press from right here, and we're doing a band tension that adds 200 pounds, from maybe about here, we're at 150, maybe at 175, we're at 200, maybe we're getting close to 250. Then by the time we get all the way out to here, we're at that 350 pounds at the top, but you're not doing that 350 pounds throughout the entire range of motion. Does that make sense in terms of accommodating resistance?
Yeah.
Okay. Now,
And what else did it say? Band?
chains and bands, yep.
Okay.
Lower body and upper body. We're going back to our exercise library. There's not as much variability in the lifts themselves when it comes to dynamic effort work, simply because we're using a lot of variability with the chains and the bands and the rep scheme and the percentages that we're using. That's where the variability comes in on the dynamic effort versus the actual lifts themselves. I'm warning you right now, I'm changing markers because my marker's dying out. So lower body, all we're really using for this method is we're using box squats and we're using deadlifts. Can you see that? Is that any better or no? All right, good talk. All right, so we're using box squats and deadlifts. Those. What's up?
I can see it a little bit better.
All right, a little bit better is better than not. Box squats and deadlifts are our main variations. Now, the big thing that we're going to talk about here too is our sets and reps. So in terms of sets, we're going to go, when I do this, I go anywhere from 12 to 8 sets, 2 to 3 reps. Now, if we're operating with higher volume, where in the percentage bracket do you think we're operating? At the lower end or the higher end? If the volume is a little bit higher, if we're doing like 12 sets of 2 or 3, what do you think?
Lower end.
Lower end, exactly. We want to operate a little bit more on that lower end than as we're decreasing the volume, increasing that intensity. Now, we're going over here to upper body. The only real movement that I have seen, let me get some new markers here, that I've seen a ton of progress or carryover with speed work is the bench press. I've tried it with different variations and stuff like that. Bench press just seems to be the biggest bang for your buck with bands and chains or whatever you're using. So we're only sticking with bench press for the sake of this program. All right. Now sets and rep wise, operate a little bit differently here. I like to go anywhere from 9 to 6 sets. Oh, I screwed this up. So over here, I apologize. This should be 1 to 2. Then over here, we're doing 2 to 3 reps. Okay? Same thing applies though. I'm going back to the other marker. This marker sucks. Same thing applies though with if we're doing 9 sets of 3, we're operating at that lower percentage, and then we increase as the volume starts to come down, we can push that intensity just a little bit more. The other thing too is you could leave this percentage work the exact same, but you could just increase the band tension, make the band tension harder, and just leave the percentage work, which is going to make the lift infinitely harder at the top of the lift, okay? Does this make sense? Dynamic effort. Any questions about it?
How many?
What's
Go ahead.
how many sets was upper body?
Say that again.
How many sets were upper body?
9 to 6 sets at 2 to 3 reps.
I think
Yep.
And for the sets and reps for lower body?
12 to 8 sets, 1 to 2 reps.
Okay.
All right, here we go. Moving on. All right, so we talked about max effort, dynamic effort. Now we're talking about repetition effort, okay? This one you don't hear too much about. Doesn't really get a whole lot of love. I like it for exactly what we're doing right now with remote learning. Once we start going through all this stuff, a lot of your at-home workouts that require body weight stuff, I utilize stuff like the repetition effort method. So if we know what max effort is, where we're trying to move as heavy of a weight as possible with as few reps as possible. And then dynamic effort, we're trying to move a percentage of a weight as fast as possible in a short amount of time. What do we think the repetition effort is?
Less weight, more reps.
Less weight, more reps, exactly. Less weight, couldn't have said it better myself, to be honest with you. Now what we want to talk about is how we're getting to this. All right, so with some different ways that we can measure this out, okay? One way that we can do is stuff like isometrics. The reason I'm throwing in isometrics is simply for the time aspect. So what is a time parameter that we use all the time? It's in your program. I even included a video on it with your exercise library. It's 8 rounds, 20 seconds on, 10 seconds off. Come on now. Starts with an E or a T, ends with an Ata.
Tabata.
Tabata. All right. What is Tabata? Anybody know or want to take a guess?
Besides hell, I remember when we did it last year.
Yeah.
It was a minute on, 30 seconds off.
No, that was something different, but it's the same philosophy. Well, I'm looking for intervals. It's interval training. Okay, so interval training is a really good way to utilize the repetition effort method. So Tabata is just a form of intervals. Another one that we can use is if I were to use work rest. It's another interval. You guys understand how a work-rest ratio works? So if I were to write this in terms of your work to rest, what am I asking you to do? 1 to 2. What am I asking for your work-rest ratio?
You rest more than you work out.
Yes, you rest more than you work out, but what's the exact correlation? So if I'm asking you to work out for 30 seconds, how long am I asking you to rest, Hector?
A minute.
A minute, exactly, okay? It's just another form of intervals, kind of like Tabata. But Tabata, it's flipped, where you're working twice as long as you're resting. You can do reverse Tabata, which is, again, a 1 to 2. There's all sorts of different things that we can do here. Another thing that you can do, max effort work. Now, I understand that that sounds confusing, but we're talking about max effort in the sense of you're going to do one set, and you're going to see how many reps you can do until failure. That's another way of doing max effort. Another one you can do in relation of max effort is you can work at certain percentages. That's a percentage sign. Excuse my horrible handwriting. But you can do max effort work at a certain percentage. See how many reps you can get at 30% of your best. Does this make sense for the repetition effort work so far?
Yeah.
Okay, now we're going to create that exercise library. I also like to use this for accessory work. Kind of makes it a little less boring. Also adds some variety. And depending on time, can get a little bit extra conditioning if we got to up the tempo a little bit. So what are some lower body movements we can use with this repetition effort? What about 5 or 6 different lifts that we can put in here? Let's hear them. Come on now.
I guess you could do box jumps or
Box jumps, yep, I like it. What else?
Glute bridges.
Glute bridges. Okay. What else?
Hamstring curls.
Hamstring curls. I know you guys love doing hamstring curls. So do my athletes here. What else? What about air squats? You think air squats is a good one? I do. What else? See if we can get one more on here. What's another lower body movement that we can do that would follow in the repetition effort?
Box squats.
Yeah, we can put box squats in there. I'm okay with that. All right, upper body. What do you got? Let's get 5 in here.
Band pull aparts.
Pull aparts, I love it. You know how much I love those. What else? What else?
That one says band pull-up.
Pull aparts. Band pull aparts.
Pull apart. Okay.
What else?
Push-ups.
Push-ups, great. Keep along those lines. What else we got?
Pull-ups.
Pull-ups, great. More. What we got? What about dips? Let's throw some dips in there. One more. Come on, guys. How about ab rollouts? You guys taking too long. All right. Any questions on repetition effort before we go into writing out the program? No? All right, good.